Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're doing a deep dive into something pretty cool. The idea of getting big results from small steps. You know those tiny actions that might not seem like much on their own, but can actually lead to some pretty incredible outcomes. We'll be taking a look at the Through and Through podcast and how they break this whole concept down.
Yeah, those guys had some great points.
Yeah, one of the things that really stuck with me was this idea of how the Grand Canyon was formed.
Right. Talk about small steps leading to big results.
Exactly. It's not like one giant earthquake just carved the whole thing out overnight. It was millions of years of erosion, just tiny bits of rock and sediment being carried away by the Colorado River.
And eventually you end up with this massive natural wonder.
It makes you think if something that epic can be created by such gradual processes, maybe we can achieve some pretty amazing things too with just those consistent small actions.
Absolutely. And that's a big part of what the podcast explores. It's this idea called the progress principle.
The progress principle. Okay, fill me in on that one.
Well, it basically suggests that making consistent, even tiny progress towards a goal can actually fuel our motivation to keep going.
So even if it feels like we're only taking baby steps, our brains are still giving us a pat on the back.
Yeah, kind of. It's like our brain is wired to reward us for making progress, even if it seems small. And that reward comes in the form of dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter associated with pleasure.
Dopamine, I've heard of that. That's the feel-good chemical, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So every time we check something off our list or achieve a small win, even if it's something super tiny, our brain releases a little bit of dopamine. And that gives us this sense of satisfaction and motivates us to keep moving forward.
So it's like our brains are saying, hey, you're doing great. Keep up the good work. That's kind of cool. But what if we're talking about a goal that feels really huge? Like something that seems almost impossible to achieve.
Like running a marathon when you can barely make it around the block.
Exactly, something like that.
Well, the podcast actually featured a listener named Rachel, whose story is a perfect example of this.
Oh, tell me about Rachel.
So Rachel really wanted to run a 5K, but the whole idea of it just felt incredibly daunting to her. She was like, there's no way I can do that.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that feeling.
So instead of trying to tackle the whole 5K all at once, she decided to start with what felt like a ridiculously achievable goal. She committed to jogging for just 30 seconds, followed by a 2-minute walk.
Wait, seriously, just 30 seconds of jogging. I mean, wouldn't most people be like, why even bother?
Right, but that's the magic of the progress principle in action. It's not about the size of the step. It's about the consistency and the feeling of accomplishment that comes with making any progress at all.
So even those tiny wins can make a difference.
Absolutely. And Rachel kept at it. She gradually increased her jogging time, always celebrating each small milestone along the way. And that's another key point here. Celebrating those tiny victories is crucial for keeping that momentum going.
It's funny. I think a lot of us are so used to only celebrating the big wins, like finishing the entire 5K or reaching the final goal. But celebrating those smaller milestones almost feels a little silly, doesn't it?
I know what you mean, but actually it's really important. Remember that dopamine rush we were talking about? Well, celebrating even in small ways triggers that release. So you're essentially reinforcing the positive behavior. It's like creating this positive feedback loop in your brain.
Oh, I see. You take a small step. Your brain rewards you with a little dopamine hit, and that makes you want to take another step and another and another.
Precisely, and that's how you build momentum over time.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how this works. It's like those small celebrations are like deposits into our motivation bank.
I like that analogy. Yeah, you're building up a reserve of positive energy that can help you stay focused and keep going.
But how does this apply to other goals beyond running? I mean, does this progress principle work for things like learning a new language or starting a business or any of those bigger life goals?
Absolutely. It's incredibly versatile. Think about it. Almost any goal can be broken down into smaller, more manageable steps. Imagine trying to write a book, for example. Just staring at a blank page with the goal of writing a whole novel can be paralyzing.
Oh, yeah, that's terrifying.
But what if you just committed to writing one paragraph a day?
One paragraph a day now, that's a goal I can actually wrap my head around.
Right. It suddenly feels way less daunting.
Definitely, I'm liking this approach more and more.
And that's the beauty of it. It breaks down those mental barriers. It's like building a staircase instead of trying to scale a sheer wall.
So true. So instead of feeling overwhelmed by the enormity of the goal, we can focus on just taking those small manageable steps, one at a time.
And celebrating each one along the way.
Right. I'm convinced small steps are the way to go, but how do we actually put this into practice? Beyond the inspiring stories and the dopamine talk, what are some practical tips that we can all use?
Well, the Through and Through podcast offered some great advice, and I think it's a perfect segue into our next section.
Awesome. Let's dive into those practical tips right after the break.
So one of the first things they talked about was this idea of breaking down that big goal into smaller, more manageable actions.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do you actually do that?
Well, think of it like planning a road trip. You wouldn't just hop in the car and say, let's drive to California.
Yeah.
You'd map out the route, identify specific stops along the way.
Right, you'd break it down into smaller chunks.
Exactly. And it's the same with goals. Instead of focusing on the entire journey, you focus on reaching those smaller destinations.
Okay, so it's like creating mini goals along the way.
Exactly. And that's where micro goals come in.
Micro goals.
Yeah, those ridiculously achievable tasks that get you moving in the right direction. Remember Rachel's 30-second jog?
Oh, yeah.
That was her initial micro goal. It felt almost too easy to fail.
So if my goal was to write a book, my first micro goal could be something like opening a new document and giving it a title.
Exactly. You got it.
That does sound kind of silly, but hey, it's a step.
It is. It's about building that momentum one tiny win at a time.
I like that.
And another thing the podcast emphasized was the importance of tracking your progress.
Oh, yeah, I'm all about tracking progress.
Yeah, whether it's with a journal, an app, or even just a simple checklist, visually seeing how far you've come can be super motivating.
Oh, I love a good checklist.
Yeah.
There's something so satisfying about ticking things off as you go.
But what about those times when we inevitably hit a snag? When progress stalls or we stumble. The Through and Through podcast talked about that too, right?
Yeah, they did.
What did they have to say about those moments?
Well, this is where those small celebrations we were talking about before come back into play. They're not just about acknowledging progress, they're also about building resilience.
Resilience. It's interesting.
Yeah. Celebrating those wins, no matter how small, helps create a buffer against self-doubt and negativity.
So it's like we're building up a reserve of positive emotions to draw on when things get tough.
Exactly. It's like creating a mental piggy bank filled with those I did it moments. So when you encounter an obstacle, you can dip into that reserve and remind yourself of your capacity for achievement.
I love that analogy. So it helps you bounce back faster and keep that momentum going.
Okay, but how does this celebrating actually work in practice? Does it have to be some grand gesture every time I achieve a micro goal?
Not at all. It's about finding what feels genuinely rewarding for you. It could be as simple as taking a moment to acknowledge your accomplishment, jotting it down in a journal, or even indulging in a small treat like a piece of chocolate or something.
I like the sound of that.
The key is to associate that positive feeling with the action of achieving a micro goal.
So it's like we're training our brains to crave those small wins because they're linked to good feelings.
Exactly. And over time, this can actually lead to a shift in perspective. You start to see challenges not as roadblocks, but as opportunities for learning and growth.
That's a good way to look at it.
And you become less afraid of failure because you know you have the resilience to overcome it.
This is all starting to make so much sense now. It's interesting. We often associate big results with those grand, dramatic moments, like hitting a major milestone or achieving some huge goal.
No.
But what I'm hearing is that those big results are actually the culmination of all those seemingly insignificant moments, those small steps and tiny celebrations that build up over time.
That's a powerful way to put it. It's about shifting our focus from the destination to the journey, finding joy in the process of growth and achievement one step at a time.
I love that this has been so insightful. I'm already thinking about all the goals I've been putting off because they just seem too overwhelming. Maybe it's time to dust them off and start taking some of those bite-sized actions.
That's the spirit. And remember, you don't have to do it alone. The Through and Through podcast also talked about the importance of community and support.
Oh, yeah. Having a support system can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. Sharing your goals with others, finding accountability partners, or even just celebrating your wins together can make the journey so much more rewarding.
It's like having a cheering section along the way, motivating you to keep going. Okay, so we've talked a lot about this whole small steps thing and how it all works, but I'm ready to actually put it into action. How can our listeners take all this amazing info and make it work for them?
Well, the Through and Through podcast, they left their listeners with a challenge, and I think it's a perfect way for us to wrap up this deep dive as well.
Ooh, a challenge. I like it. Lay it on us.
All right, so think about a goal. You have something that's been on your mind, but maybe it feels kind of daunting, something you keep putting off.
Okay, got it. I'm thinking.
Now imagine breaking that goal down into the smallest possible step. The smallest step you could take today.
Like the teeniest, tiniest little action.
Exactly. Even if it seems silly. What's one thing that would move you just a fraction of an inch closer to that goal?
Okay, so for my goal, The smallest step could be just spending 5 minutes researching it online. That feels totally doable, even right now.
There you go. That's it. That's all it takes to get started. Don't overthink it. Just commit to taking that one tiny action. Okay, I can do that. And here's the important part once you've done it. Celebrate.
Wait, really? Celebrate just for doing 5 minutes of research?
Yes. Seriously. No matter how small it might seem, acknowledge your progress.
Huh. It is funny how we always wait for those big moments to celebrate, but even those tiny wins deserve a little recognition, right?
Absolutely.
It's like we're rewiring our brains to find joy in the process itself, not just the end result.
Exactly. And that's what makes this approach so powerful. You're not relying on willpower alone. You're creating a system that reinforces itself with every small step and every little celebration.
I love that. So to all our listeners out there, we challenge you to join us. Think about that one small step you can take today towards a goal that's been on your mind. Maybe it's making a phone call, writing a paragraph, or even just putting on your running shoes like Rachel did.
Whatever it is, just take that step
Celebrate it.
and let us know how it feels.
We'd love to hear about your progress.
Remember, big results come from those consistent small steps and a willingness to celebrate the wins along the way.
We believe in you.
And we can't wait to hear about the amazing things you'll achieve.
That wraps up our deep dive into the power of small steps and celebrating wins. We hope you found it exciteful and, most importantly, actionable. Remember, even the tiniest actions can create ripples of change, leading to some pretty remarkable outcomes over time. Until next time, keep taking those small steps and celebrating every win along the way.